Hello friends, and welcome to the third part of this tutorial. Thanks for staying with me for so long, and let's get to the general lighting, shading and rendering of the shield we just created. Let's start off by plugging in the textures that we generated in Substance Painter. For that I will create a new layout here, one for image editor window, one for node editor. I'm selecting now the outer bronze material and adding a principled shader, which we will use for all of our shaders. By the way, for searching for the various nodes of node editor, I use Shift A and then I just type in the names of the nodes. One of those is image texture, and we will use this one for plugging in the textures from Substance Painter. First, let's start with this outer shield base color. Plug it in the base color socket. And just to check if everything is working, I switch to the texture view and it seems to be plugged in. So now let's add in more image textures by duplicating the image texture node using Shift D. And here I forgot to start recording the keys I type, so sorry for that. From now on you will see the keys again. And don't forget to set this color space to non-color data for these additional maps that we're going to bring in. The first one is roughness. I plug it in the roughness socket. And then again by using Shift D, I duplicate the image texture node and plug it in the metallic socket. And by selecting various texture maps in the material viewport mode, you preview them. You can preview them as well in the texture mode. That's useful for previewing what you just plugged in. But now when I checked if everything works, I'm going back to the solid mode. One more important map that we have to plug in and use non-color data for it as well is the normal map. You plug it in this normal socket, but it doesn't work by itself. You have to plug in the normal map node and put it in between the texture and the normal socket. And here you see me hitting the rendered preview mode. However, everything is dark because I didn't set any lights or environment for this scene. For that, I go to the world menu and click on use nodes in the surface pull down, and then open an image and navigate into my HDRI folder where I choose some HDRI that I like. This one is from HDR Haven, a website offering free HDR images, and I can't recommend it enough. Go there, support the authors and download the images, they're great. However, this image proved to be too modern for my taste, so I'm actually changing the image and situating it on some sort of seaside pier, which seems more appropriate for this ancient shield. Also, because I have a node regler plugin enabled in the Blender settings, I can just hit Ctrl T when selecting the environment image in the node editor, and the mapping node immediately plugs into the environment node, and I can rotate with the environment any way I want. Also, a short note, you can switch to the environment mode of the node editor by hitting the little planet icon to the right from the node menu. The object is still a little too dark, so I'm setting a different strength of the HDRI image, and also in the film settings in the render tab, I'm enabling the transparency. Since I won't be rendering the environment itself, I can just make it invisible and focus on the lighting of the shield. Right now I've added a sun lamp to the scene, and by rotating it I'm trying to figure out where the general direction of the main lamp or the main light source should come from in the scene. However, I'm still not very happy with the environment image that I used, so I'm trying to find something more suitable. This choice of the environment image is a very important thing. You should never underestimate it and play around with the environment until you like what you get, because all the subsequent lighting is based on this environment map that you use. And after some additional rotating of the environment and playing around with the settings of in this mapping node, I'm quite happy with the result. So I go to solid mode and start playing around with the sun direction again. Of course, all this is far from the final result, and I'm basically just figuring out a way to illuminate my object and properly see my shading. By the way, one more important keyboard shortcut is Shift F, through which you'll be able to fly around in your scene with your camera. So all the tilting and panning and moving the camera I activate through this Shift F command. Since we only plugged in the textures of the outer bronze shader, let's now copy this node structure. You do that by hitting this little icon there. And then when you select your other shaders, you can simply just hit this paste button and you have the whole structure paste into the new shader. Then it's just a matter of switching the textures for correct ones by opening the image texture node and replacing it. You do the same thing for the third material or any number of materials you have on your shield. And now when we hit render, all looks the way we created it in Substance Painter. Of course, the object is not properly lit from the bottom now, but we will figure it out in the next chapters. A bit of admiring our creation, and now let's move on. All the parts of the shield are now shaded except for the rope and the tassels. I've added some common diffuse red color, but I'm not happy with the result just yet. So let's play around with this shader a bit. First thing I did was changing the shader to principled and changing the roughness a bit. And then in the rendered mode, I started playing around with the actual color of the object. By the way, to render just a selected region of the viewport, you hit Ctrl B and drag a rectangular with a selection. This way I was able to render only the one tassel instead of the whole screen. And I think this part of the object doesn't need more attention. The only thing that I needed to improve was the shading of the rings holding together the tassels. I actually did this shading before I create the shader of the rope, but let's include it into this chapter as a bonus because it can show you how to manipulate the UVs of the object to use textures meant for different mesh. The thing is, I did not export these rings into Substance Painter, so I didn't create textures for them, but they're so similar to the other rings on the object that I can just take the UV regions I created for this ring, hitting G and positioning them on the textures meant for other meshes. This object is so small that I can safely overlap the UV regions and nothing will be visible. So by simply moving the UV regions for these objects, I was able to quickly shade them using the textures meant for other meshes. Before we go ahead and continue with the lighting of the scene, let's just quickly duplicate the tassels around the shield. So for this chapter, I will just speed up the whole process because it's all about moving and rotating the duplicated objects. And sorry for the constant moving with the camera and rotating the scene. Next time when I record these tutorials, I will try to move the camera a little less. I also found out that the face of the shield, or the symbol on it, was not rotated properly compared to the armband. So I just quickly rotated it. And then I started to play around with the light some more. For that, I changed the UV image editor into a new viewport so that I could see the rendered result while I was working on the lighting in the right bottom corner. At this point, I'm trying to figure out the direction of the main light source again and how it combines with the HDR map. However, at this point, I realized that the shield is positioned stupidly, basically lying on the floor. And to light it properly, I decided to stand it up as if it was standing on its side. For that purpose, I created an empty and parented all of the shield parts to this empty. You do that by selecting all the parts, then shift selecting the empty, hitting Ctrl P, and then hitting Object Keep Transforms. This way you can just select the empty and everything can rotate or move with it instead of just selecting the group or all the parts individually. And since I knew that I wanted to create a turntable in the end, this empty object is perfect for creating the rotating animation. By hitting Shift F, I again started to position my render camera, and I decided to change the overall dimensions of the render. I decided that a square format will be better for the render and for the composition. And now when I had the camera angle figured out, I could start the final lighting process. I knew what I wanted was to have the snakes properly lit and also to have some sort of bottom light illuminating the shield face from the bottom. For a while I played around with the setting of the HDR and its strength. However, then I started to add more light. First, I duplicated this sunlight and put it behind the shield so that it created the rim I was after. Then I experimented with rotating the shield to see how it looks in different angles. And that's of course where the empty came in handy, because I could just select it and rotate it on Z-axis. Here I'm switching to GPU compute system. It generally tends to be faster when computing graphic operations. I returned the shield to the original rotation and started to light the bottom part of the face. For that I first created a point light, but then I changed it to area light because I wanted this wide source of light, as if there was some sort of reflective ground reflecting in the shield. When I chose the proper color, I duplicated this light and created a new one shining from the top, simulating the sky, so I made it blue. And in the end, it was all just a matter of experimenting with the intensity of various lights, of trying to rotate the shield and see how it looks from different angles. I decided to bring the intensity down on some lights, bring it up on the others. It's all about your creative choice. It's not really something I can say, this is the way to do it. And I myself am not an expert at lighting. Still, in the end, I think I achieved some presentable result with this. And of course, if you download the Gumroad package, you can get my project files and have a look at the exact way these lights are set up in the final scene. Here I'm adding one more point light, illuminating the heads of the snakes and also simulating some highlight of a sun. Of course, the light doesn't make much sense now because there are two sun sources, but as long as the result looks pleasing, I'm of an opinion that you can cheat a little, or even cheat a lot. But definitely don't quote me on that. Experiment with your lights and maybe achieve something much better than my result. You can see now that even at this point I'm still rotating the environment image and even changing it to achieve a brighter result. Fun fact number 10. The armband of the Aspis shield was actually a small revolution at the time. Unlike many other ancient shield types held only by hand, this one was actually steadied both by the forearm and by the grip. This is how the Hoplite was able to hold the weight throughout the battle. Many later shield types were inspired by this concept, among them the Roman legionary shields or even the medieval shields. And that was fun fact number 10. In the end, I decided to take the camera and rotate the camera as well, completely changing the side from which the object is seen. And I quickly readjusted all the lights then. And in the meantime, we have time for some fun fact. The majority of the information we know about the Aspis shields come from three sources. First, the paintings on the Greek vases. Second, the ancient authors like Thucydides, Aeschylus or Xenophon, who were often hoplites themselves, and also from archaeological findings. One almost completely preserved shield was found in an Etruscan tomb in southern Italy. Remains were also discovered at Olympia and Delphi. And that was fun fact number 11. And with that, while still rotating the shield and adjusting the light for the different angles, I decided that I'm ready for the final render. After hitting render, I realized there were several things that needed changing. One thing I'm doing now is going to the Performance tab in the render window and setting the tiles to 512 pixels, because when you're rendering with GPU activated, this is a much quicker solution. And also I am activating the denoising. The first of these changes will make your GPU render faster, and the second one will deliver a more clean result. And here we go, our first finalized render is ready. There are, however, some problems with the rope. However, I managed to solve these by applying the screw and the curve modifiers. Here I'm doing a little test render to see whether the applied modifiers helped, and all seems just fine. And to the second rendering slot, I rendered the front of the shield. I, of course, rotated the empty object back and hit render. And here we go. I think this looks quite fine. The rendering times aren't so bad, and we are ready to set up our final animation of the turntable. One quick tip, you switch between the current and the previous version of the render by hitting Alt J. Wonderful, so we arrived to the last chapter of this tutorial, and all that needs to be done is to render out this finished shield. For that I created a new layout. I added the graph editor and the timeline to the bottom right corner, a 3D viewport to the left bottom corner, and the render view in the top corner. Making the shield spin is of course as easy as selecting the empty that we parented the shield to, and then adding keyframes, one at the first frame with the Z rotation 0, and the second one at frame 100 with the rotation at 360. This will ensure that at 25 FPS the whole shield will make a turn during 4 seconds, which is quite enough. And of course the animation can then be looped and made as long as needed. I selected both of the keyframes in the graph editor and then set the interpolation type to linear. This basically means that there will be no smoothing out and smoothing in of the animation, which we don't need. And with that, this highly advanced animation is ready. Before I hit the final render button, I just set a few things. First, the destination folder where I want the image sequence to be rendered out. For that, I create a special folder in my project structure. In fact, so special that I made it a round table instead of a turntable. So let's create a correct folder. And here I type in the name of the turntable animation, and each image that will be rendered out will have this name plus the number of the current frame. For this project I'm using 25 FPS, so that's what I set here. Then I check that I'm using PNG format. I leave everything else as it is. And with that, the time has come to hit the magical button and create the final animation. So, I'm very glad that you finished this tutorial with me, or even bought it on Gumroad with all the project files and some bonus lessons. I'm really glad and I really appreciate that you did that. And I hope to grab your attention again when I release some new courses on this channel in the future. So, bye bye my friends.